Alright, so as you can see, the book that I'm covering is Gustav Klimt, the Beethoven Frieze and the Controversy over the Freedom of Art. And mostly in this presentation we'll be covering the content of the book, and then later at the end we're going to cover what does it have to do with creative destruction and the clarity of the writing style. So this is Gustav Klimt. He's an Austrian-born painter. At the time of the paintings that we're going to talk about, he was the leader of the Vienna Secession. You may know him best for his painting, The Kiss. And in this presentation, the first set of paintings we're going to cover is the faculty paintings for the University of Vienna. The University of Vienna commissioned Klimt to create three allegorical paintings of philosophy, medicine, and jurisprudence for the ceiling of the ceremonial hall within the university. First painting we're going to cover, philosophy. Let's see. So as you can see, we've got this group of people up here, and we've got this kind of amorphous head in the stars, and then this head back down here. Now this is said to represent possibly a symbol for knowledge, the head down here. Klimt called the figure in this painting Das Wesen, and many say that she is reminiscent of Wagner's Erda and Nietzsche's drunken, over-wakeful priestess. We have the Sphinx in the middle, which is said to be a symbol of the unknown, and the Tower of People are said to represent the different stages of life. And this is a sketch of the painting. As you can see in the previous painting that it's in black and white, it's because it's a photograph. The paintings were destroyed in World War II, which I'm very sad about. But anyway, so responses to philosophy. Wasn't received very well. 87 faculty members of the University of Vienna signed a petition protesting the painting and asking the Ministry of Culture to reject it. They said that the painting presented unclear ideas through unclear form. On the bright side, 10 professors produced a counter-petition saying that the other professors did not have the expertise to judge the painting. Second painting for the faculty paintings is medicine. As you can see, we have mankind in this amorphous blob, kind of lost in space, with death, you see the skeleton up there floating in black. He's floating centrally throughout the blob of humans. Here we have Hygeia, who is said to be the goddess of healing. And then this floating woman, which many have guessed her to symbolize the preservation of the human race. Also we have sickness, who's depicted in red, but of course you can't see that because you can't see the red. And death, who are antagonists to the floating woman. And if you could see the actual painting in color, you would see that it's depicted at dawn, with the light from dawn cascading over the floating woman and Hygeia and the man who's supporting her. This is like a pre-sketch for medicine that has survived. And responses to medicine, of course, were even worse than the responses to philosophy. They said that it was obscene. As you can see by the floating figure here, they thought she was a little too obscene. And there's a woman in the previous frame. Up here there's a pregnant woman, and on the other side there's a woman who's breastfeeding, which they also thought was obscene. Politicians were also angered by this painting, and Klimt was deeply troubled by the response. Next painting we have is jurisprudence. As you can see here, we have this octopus engulfing this man. The octopus is said to represent the tentacles of the law. At the top of the painting we have three figures, truth, justice, and the law, and their lofty perch gives a sense of disinterest and abandonment towards mankind. These three females at the forefront are said to represent the real officers of the law, or the Furies of Greek mythology, or the pangs of conscience. Responses to jurisprudence, critics simply found it even more puzzling than the first two. Next, we have the Beethoven Frieze. Now this is a statue of Klinger's Beethoven. It's kind of an iconic image, maybe you've seen it before. This was the central exhibition, or the central piece of work at the 14th exhibition of the Vienna Secession. And Klimt created his Beethoven Frieze to kind of frame the statue. Oops, there we go. The first wall of the Frieze. This character right here, it's repeated often. It's said to symbolize the longing for happiness. These characters here are said to represent the sufferings of weak humanity, and this knight here is said to represent the plea to the well-armed, strong man. These two characters here are said to represent pity and ambition. Now, Klimt's Beethoven Frieze is actually a visual artistic representation of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Like, for example, this first wall is an interpretation from musical to visual of his first movement of the symphony, which I just think is so cool. All right, the second wall, known as the hostile forces. This gorilla-like figure is said to represent Typhoeus from Greek myth. These three figures on the left of him are said to be his daughters, the Gorgons. The figures above the Gorgons are said to represent sickness, madness, and death. These characters here are said to represent lasciviousness, lust, and excess, and this character here is said to represent gnawing grief. Finally, the third and last wall. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, the second wall is an interpretation of the first and second movements of the symphony. The third wall, if I switch my note cards here, also shows the figures representing the longing for happiness. Finally, we have poetry, which is an interpretation of the third movement, and of the arts. And finally, a choir of angels and a couple embracing. Now, the poetry is said to represent the third movement, and the fourth, or this final picture here is said to represent the fourth movement, which is actually an interpretation and an adaptation of Schiller's Ode to Joy. This is the final chorus from the fourth movement of the Ode to Joy, saying, let's see, joy, beautiful spark of divinity, which is what these characters here are supposed to represent. And this kiss for the whole world, where is it? Right there, is supposed to be the couple is supposed to represent that phrase. Responses to the Frieze. Well, you can say that people didn't respond very well. Klimt was actually very disappointed in everyone's response. In regards to these characters of sickness, madness, and grief, critics called them pictures of madness, pathological scenes, shameless caricatures of the noble human form. In regards to these three characters here, lasciviousness, lust, and excess, they called them painted pornography. The representations of lasciviousness, which is this character, the red-headed female, are among the most extreme ever devised in the field of obscene art. Finally, we ask, what does this have to do with creative destruction? The fact that Klimt changed from a traditional style to a modern style in these paintings, I believe, embodies creative destruction. It's getting rid of the old, the bland, the boring, and coming up with something new and exciting. Also, you can say, in a way, that his critics kind of, in a way, destroyed his creativeness, in a way, if you want to call that creative destruction also. Finally, the clarity and style of the writing, I just thought it was rather confusing because the book was structured into 5 chapters. Each of them was an essay on Klimt's works by a different author. So there was a lot of overlapping ideas. Some of them kind of contradicted each other sometimes. But personally, I found the book really enjoyable because it had a lot to do with music, which of course I'm interested in. I would say that the book would be geared more towards a person who has a little bit of knowledge of art and possibly a little bit of knowledge of music. And finally, bibliography page for all the pictures. And that's the end.